Python Save Time in Evaluating Your Statistics presentation, hosted by the NASIC Standards Committee. I'm Jessica Scott from Clemson University, and I'll be moderating the presentation. Members of the committee will be moderating the chat if you need help. Our presenter today is Ilda Cardenas, the Electronic Resources Librarian and affiliation from Cal State Fullerton. She has served on the Standards Committee since 2020 and is our representative for Counter. Ilda, you ready?
Hi, everybody. I'm Ilda. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here. This is my presentation on automating your calendar reports with Python. This webinar is brought to you in part by the NASIC Standards Committee. We hope to get more standards related content to you all. And a little bit about me before I get started. I'm the counter representative for the Standards Committee. I'm also the Electronic Resources Librarian at Cal State Fullerton. And one of my main functions here is collecting usage statistics. So here's a little agenda. I'll touch on why I think you're interested in attending this talk. I'll mention my experience with programming languages. I'll describe the workflow for collecting usage statistics at Cal State Fullerton. I'll show you how the code I wrote works, but this will not be a hands-on exercise. And then I'll discuss the road ahead with this workflow. And at the end, I'll provide you with some resources that have helped me code and the written code that I wrote for this presentation. I'll provide that at the end. So why are you here? You might have been wondering why this webinar is relevant to you. And I'm assuming you all work with counter reports. And as we all know, this process is tedious. I'm not going to go into detail about what counter reports are here. You can refer to the Project Counter website for more detailed information on usage reports. You might also be wondering why I'm that there's SUSHI to automate this process, but I won't be talking about SUSHI. At Cal State Fullerton, we use Ex Libris Alma as our system, and in my experience, I wait until the last minute to collect my usage stats, and by the time I actually sit down with this process, it's a little too late to try to learn how to run the report in analytics. So I've never been able to set up SUSHI here. So this webinar will not be talking about SUSHI. I'll be talking about how running counter reports and using code to automate that process. It's just faster for me to go to the vendor website. And I know that there are people in the CSU system that know how to do this, and probably across the country and across the world that know how to do this. I just can't. So I'm also going to say that I'm in no way fluent in programming languages. Most of the code I am offering here was written with my colleague. Shout out to David Palmquist, who's an expert in programming. And I've been agonizing over trying to learn to code for a few years now. I think I started in 2019, and and I'm hopeful that one day I will be able to get started with a coding project on my own without the help of David Palmquist, but that's not happening anytime soon. With all this said, is it worth learning to code? At the glacial speed I'm going with learning Python, I wonder the same for myself. It's taking a long time to figure this out. And as I'll discuss later in the presentation, some of the tasks I was doing with Excel spreadsheets were taking a long time, and were done cell by cell. It was a lot of copying and pasting, and prior to learning to writing this code, I was making a lot of errors, a lot of human errors here. And I'm not an expert in Excel either. Like, it's not something that I really like to do, even though Excel spreadsheets are a big part of my job. But I'm a couple of doors down from David Palmquist, my library's programmer, and he's very excited about coding. He's proselytizing coding. He's held workshops in the library to teach us how to program, and his hope is that we'd all use it in our day-to-day work. He has also told me that Excel just gives you a pretty user interface, but it's vulnerable to corruption, and it might change things without you knowing. I tell him that I'm up to my eyeballs in spreadsheets, and I find myself copying and pasting data from one sheet to another. And he's said to me, "Do you really want to do that for the rest of your career?" He goes on to tell me that anyone under 40 should learn to code in order to stay competitive in the workplace. So I have that pressure lingering in my mind. And I try to remember how I felt when I started in my career as a library professional. And I've usually been the youngest person in the office, and I saw my older colleagues struggle with their computers and with other computer programs, and I would lose my patience with them. And now I'm no longer the youngest in the office, and I might be turning into these older colleagues. And I might risk turning into these older colleagues if I don't put in the work to learn something new. And I feel like counter reports are a great programming project, just because they are formatted the same, they all look about the same, and you get the same information from each spreadsheet. And it's standard. So I'm pretty confident that they're all going to look the same. So it would be easier to manipulate the data that way. And so my role at CSUF, at Cal State Fullerton, is I'm the Electronic Resources Librarian. I collect usage stats. That is my main function. That is what everyone knows that I do here. But I'm also a member of the collection development team. And this team helps a collection development librarian make collections decisions for the library. So although I don't make any purchasing decisions for the library, I can't just go ahead on my authority to buy something. That's not what I do here. I do know that these usage reports that I collect influence the library's decisions over its investment in electronic resources. So I do my best to stay current with Counter, and when I'm in in these in the CD team meetings, the collection development team, I like to explain what how I collected the reports, what they mean, especially with the changeover to counter 5. I was explaining what has changed between counter 4 and counter 5. So I find it really important to be able to explain these things to my group. And so there's a few workflows that happen when collecting usage stats. Counter reports are collected for 3 big reasons. We have subscription renewals that are managed by the consortia or the chancellor's office. And locally, we have our Harrasowitz renewals. And our consortia subscriptions come to us throughout the year. It feels like, I mean, I don't really get a firm deadline to provide all of our usage statistics for our consortially managed resources. And then we have our Harrasowitz renewals. Harrasowitz is our subscription manager. So they help us with our one-off journal subscriptions. They kind of take care of a lot of the grunt work with that. I will say this, we do not pay for the service where Harrasowitz collects usage statistics for us. So I have to do it. And the reason I collect usage stats is to determine the value of our investment on our subscriptions. And then we decide whether or not we are going to renew a subscription or not. So this comes in at the end of summer. I have to get all usage for 369 subscriptions. But luckily, I only have to pull 50 counter reports just because that's how they fall in by platform. And 369, usage for 369 journals is a lot. And the problem lies in the way these subscriptions are reviewed. Part of my role in Electronic Resources is to provide reports that can be understood by my colleagues in the collection development team. And this group comprises our collection development librarian, she's the chair of the committee, some folks from acquisitions, and we also have reference and instruction librarians in this team. And they need a list of all our subscriptions that are going under review. And I have to provide them with the current price. And this is all to use a, we use a formula to determine whether or not the ILL cost will be more if we cancel. There's a lot of computation involved in this, but this is where Python is really helpful. Because what I'm doing is putting together all I put all the counter reports into one folder. The code concatenates, or if you think about it, I'm just copying and pasting every single counter report into one spreadsheet. This is the Excel terms that I'm using. And it makes it easier for me to look at all these titles. This mega spreadsheet has all of our usage listed. but I only need the titles that are managed by Harrasowitz. And this is where the code comes into play. Since it's hard for me to talk about code without actually showing you, these next slides are going to be screenshots. This is also not going to be a hands-on demonstration, but rather how the code functions like on my computer, because I feel like when it comes to learning code, I had to really visualize how it looks. So to start, I'm going to show you a run-of-the-mill counter report, depending on some factors like what platform it comes from, what type of report it is, what type of report it is, and like the reporting period. These all look the same. So at the end of the fiscal year, I usually have to wait like a couple of weeks after June 30th to start collecting usage stats, because I'm not gonna wait for the vendor to make the usage stats ready. I run a tight ship. So that's why I wait until like mid-July to start collecting my usage stats. And so I create a folder. Organizing your reports is pretty important for running your code. So for this demonstration, I'm showing you that I have a specific folder for my usage stats. And I'll say this, your usage stats can live anywhere as long as they're organized in a folder. And my setup is, so once you open that usage stats folder, this is kind of what the environment I have to make my code run effectively without any problems. And this TRJ3 is where all my data goes. This is where I put in all my counter data. So just to open it up, here are all my usage stats. And you're probably wondering why I'm collecting TRJ3s and not TRJ1s. And this is because according to the ACRL IPED's instructions, they want us to collect open access journal usage for resources that are discoverable. So I'm trying to kill two birds with one stone, and I only want to download counter reports once a year. That is something that I'm really trying to do. It doesn't always happen that way. So if I read the instructions wrong, it's a little late for me now. But let's see. One thing that I want to point out is that when you're collecting your usage stats, they do come in different file formats. So some come in TSV, some come in CSV, others come in Excel. And so those are some challenges that come with processing these types of statistics with Python. They need a different line of code for these files to be read in. And this is what it looks like. If you look at this little start, it just reads in all the files that end with TSV. It reads in all the files that are Excel, and then I have another one for CSV. So I don't have to process each individual counter report in my code. So this is part of the automating part. And regardless of file type, my code accounts for it. the code compiles all these titles into one mega spreadsheet. And here's an example of it. So before, I used to do this all manually. I used to, copy and paste a whole counter report and paste it into one spreadsheet. And I do that for each platform. But now there's code for it, and I don't have to spend a day doing this. And that's kind of the beautiful part of it. And not only that, it's alphabetized. Like, it's alphabetized. So I mentioned this already. I used to do this manually by hand before I had this code. And I used to copy and paste a lot of this usage data. And this used to take me about a day or two. And although it did help me eventually work on usage statistics here, it was a lot of manual work. And this, like I've said before, it opens you up for error. I might forget a whole platform's worth of usage stats, or the spreadsheet becomes so big that your computer can't handle opening it. So there's some real danger in having such a big spreadsheet. So here, this is a code for the mega spreadsheet. And this is the spreadsheet that I get from Harrasowitz. They send us, or we ask for, a list of all of our active subscriptions that we are evaluating for the fiscal year. This spreadsheet from Harrasowitz shows us sorry, I've already talked about that. I'll pause here and say that since CSUF does not pay for the service for Harrasowitz to collect usage for us, we just don't pay for it. And I think that it's some cost savings here. But the spreadsheet has information useful for me. The journal title, the EISSN number is really important. Price information is somewhere on the other end. But it's kind of hard to tell where each of these journals comes from, like what platform they're on. Like, I think this column can kind of tell you, but it's not a very reliable way to do it. So when I was working on usage statistics, I used to struggle with trying to figure out where the journal would be found in all the usage statistics that I filed, all the counter stats that I had. So I used to have to open up the individual counter report to see if the journal title was there. And because of the code, I am basically telling it to narrow down the titles from the mega spreadsheet to only show me the titles that are found in the Harrasowitz spreadsheet, so that any title that is in this spreadsheet would just like be kind of contained into this more manageable spreadsheet. This is the code that makes this possible. I'm basically merging this spreadsheet with this spreadsheet, and it's giving me only the essential information that I need, like journal title, the platform where it comes from, the EISSN number, metric type is really important for me, and then the total, the reporting period total, the usage number. And it gives it to me in one spreadsheet. So this is the code. And now I don't even have to guess what platform the journal is from. And this is such a time saver for me. I also don't have to really know, like, automatically know where, like, anything about the subscription we're reviewing. And that makes this process a lot faster. And there's still some ways to go in this process, just because, like, there's still some hands-on manual copying and pasting here. But I can safely say that this process used to take 6 weeks and took 2 faculty librarians 6 weeks to do this. But now it's done by me, and it takes about 2 weeks of active time, including going to each vendor and downloading the report. When I started, the Harrasowitz report used counter reports collected from, like, over a year ago, a year before. So we were a year behind in collecting our usage statistics. And that's not a very, for me, I don't think that it's a very reliable, like, the numbers aren't reliable for the collection development team to evaluate our subscriptions. And another positive thing is that I've already, like, once I collect the counter reports, I've collected the usage statistics that can be used for ACRL and iPads, which is also really helpful. So what I do, and this is where a lot of the manual information and manual work comes in. This is the report that I delivered to the CD team. So it's colorful, so it's easier for them to read visually. It calculates cost per use. I've blocked out our price information just to be on the safe side. But this spreadsheet does a lot of work. It calculates cost per use. It calculates, it determines whether or not, like, the cost of an ILL request will cost more if the journal is canceled. It provides historical usage. So I'm now just kind of like, I include the 2 previous years worth of usage. And because I'm using, like, this spreadsheet is kind of like, I build on it every year. You know, we have notes that we've written for ourselves, whether or not we're gonna renew it, or if we're gonna wait on a subscription for, like, to determine whether or not we're gonna cut a journal. I'm not so sure if this information, like, if all this information, oh, and I'm also doing an overlap analysis here. So because I collect all of our counter reports from all of our platforms, I'm able to find usage for the same journal in other platforms. So this is another factor that kind of comes into play when we're deciding whether or not we're gonna renew or cancel a subscription. And I'm not so sure if Alma Analytics can really do this in this way. I'm just not sure. I also don't want to create a system where we have to create mental notes for ourselves. So I want everything recorded on paper. I like to put down like where the usage came from, because every year this gets a lot easier now that I know, like I can always refer to this spreadsheet and be like, oh, this journal is in this counter report, just in case I need to like double check my work. And this is probably where I want to automate this process too. There's probably some way to do this in Python, but I'm still learning the language of coding. So, I'm still learning Python. I'm like I said, I'm not an expert in this. And so like I said, like once the Harrasowitz renewals are done, I don't think about collecting more usage until it's time to work on ACRL iPads. On my end, all I have to do is add up all our usage and fill out a couple of boxes. And I reuse the code that I've written for Harrasowitz subscription. So when if you can remember, I had my mega spreadsheet with all of our counter reports listed. This code I wrote will add up all the like my ACRL iPads number. It can sum up all these values here. So now I don't have to go into each individual spreadsheet, calculate the total for each platform. And I know that there's probably a totally different way to do this, but I found a way to automate it. And so that's also saving me a lot of time. Like I remember when I started, this also took another 6 weeks to do. And I just grew really frustrated with this process because I didn't think that 2 people really needed to do this. And especially, 2 faculty librarians, like it was just a poor use of our time. And granted, you're still probably going to have to collect usage from other platforms that, may not be counter compliant, but at least you get a solid foundation of numbers. So I want to go back to my earlier point about staying current in the field. I don't remember computer programming being part of the curriculum when I went to library school. And I'm not so sure if it's taught right now. And I feel like this is a gap in our knowledge. There's so much potential for us as librarians to learn to code. Like we can, make our work a lot easier with code, especially since we work with spreadsheets. And there's a lot of free information out there to learn programming, and but I don't always see a lot of library specific information out there. And I mentioned my library programmer, computer programmer a lot because I'm determined to learn for him, because like I see that there's potential. He's definitely made my work a lot easier. And as as I'm learning more and more, I I just get really self-conscious that I'm not learning as fast as I'd like. And through our conversations, I've learned that I'm not really I'm having a hard time breaking down the 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 part of the work that I want to do. And I and and the programmer guy says, I'm looking for a cookbook. Uh, and really there aren't any cookbooks out there that are library specific, especially not counter. And I'm still thinking in terms of like using Excel, which is not a very not a really good way to learn. So I'm struggling to articulate the problem that I have, and I'm having a hard time trying to figure out what I want to do with the data in front of me. So recently I've incorporated artificial intelligence to help me write code. I'm using GitHub's Copilot, and this is a paid subscription, but it's kind of helped me solve some of the problems on my own that I used to have to ask my colleague for help when I'd be stuck. Um, and I hope you take my advice that like if you're thinking of using Copilot, it's pretty important to have some basic understanding of Python before you dive into this. So I have some resources. There's the library carpentry page. It's a lesson program to help you with Git, Open Refine, MarcEdit, and Python. And sometimes they hold online workshops, but I think that they do some in person, if I recall. I've watched the YouTube channel Data School. Some of these videos, I really like the instructor. He's really nice. He keeps a pretty even pace, and he explains things thoroughly and thoughtfully. And then I'm just gonna put a shout out for GitHub Copilot because it has helped me kind of write the code that I like. It helped me write the code for the ACRL steps. And here's my code on GitHub for you to use. And thank you for coming to my webinar. I really appreciate you taking the time to come here. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing. If there are any questions out there.
There are, Ilda. We have a whole bunch of questions for you from the chat. So I'm just gonna go in order in the way they came in. So the first question was, do you also work with non-standard reports such as the TR, DR, or PR, or work only on statistics for journals, like the J3 reports that you showed for your example? And in the cases, if you do use those other reports, is there any difference in processing?
So because of the database reports and the platform reports, whenever I collect those usage stats, it's because it's a one-off subscription renewal. So I haven't really needed to write code for that. But yeah, that's I haven't written any code for that, but I'm sure that there's a way to do that.
Right, to use your code as like the base and then just go through changing as you
Yeah.
need to based on the different names in those reports. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. The next question is, some providers for some vendors remain in R4 using R4 counterstats. For these cases, how do you operate? How do you operate if you do collections of that data? Do you conduct conversions to the R5 proposed by the counter project? And this may your counter your work with counter may come into play here.
Yeah, usually. So I don't convert the data to R5 to release 5. I usually just explain to the group what the differences are between R4 and R5, and we'll usually just kind of take that in mind when we're reviewing the subscription that way.
That makes sense. Which metrics do you prioritize? And the question asker, as I was seeing a lot of unique item requests.
Yeah, so that's what we use. So I think when release 5 came out, I kind of like figured out what that metric means. My supervisor and I just said, why don't we just use unique item requests? Like that should be why how we evaluate our subscriptions, because like if there's one person using the same thing over and over and over again, like it's not really a unique use.
Right.
So I think for us, we want to make sure that like we have like the unique uses matter more to us than just use, is what I'm saying.
Definitely. The next question is, could you touch on how you're doing overlap analysis with this data?
Yeah, let me go back to my presentation. So I guess I'm doing an overlap analysis individually by title. Like, and maybe I'm using the wrong term, but I'm looking, like I'm pulling usage for the journal from 2 different platforms. And so I guess there's overlap in that way. And sorry. I guess like what I'm trying to say is like because I'm pulling usage from other platforms, we're able to determine whether or not like this journal is accessible in some other way. And I guess that's where the overlap comes from. Does that answer your question?
Jackie, feel free to get into the comments there and get in the chat there and let us know if you want to follow up. Oh, she says it does. She said she would consider that overlap analysis. As would I.
Thank
As would
goodness.
I.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, and there's 2 platforms like that, and that's why like I had a hard time, like I didn't want to just add up the usage for the 2 each platform. I wanted to make it separate just to kind of let the collection development team know that this journal is available from another in another platform. Right. And that helps us make a better decision over whether or not we're going to renew it.
I'm sure, especially when you consider like with aggregator content, you know, you're sometimes loath to cancel a subscription because you're like, what if that aggregator content goes away? But if it were something like a JSTOR where you're like, oh wow, everybody who uses this journal is using the archival bits in JSTOR and they're never using our front file subscription, you might say, oh, maybe we don't need that front file subscription anymore.
Yeah, and I think that has something to do with like brand loyalty as well.
Yeah.
Like I know our students are just really familiar with EBSCO and ProQuest. So like
Right.
if they see a link with that, and they'll click on it.
Yeah, totally. Um, the next question is, have you considered using an AI large language model like ChatGPT to generate Python code or coach you through learning and creating? This kind of goes to what you were talking about um,
With
with your
Copilot.
subscription. Yeah.
Yeah, I had not thought about it. I'm just like surprised that I'm able to use AI in my work because like my colleague, the computer programmer, was like, oh, like, have you thought about incorporating AI into your work? And I'm like, there's no way to do this in ER. And now I know that there is a way to do this. So yeah, I'll definitely start considering this using ChatGPT. It might be a way to bypass the Copilot, right?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, it might be interesting to see if Copilot's offering you something um, that ChatGPT isn't too, like if there's like especially that educational component, because it's one thing to give you a bunch of code, it's another thing to tell you why that code works. And so
Yes,
you're learning as you go.
definitely.
Oh, and Anna says she uses ChatGPT to write Excel formulas. Great,
Oh,
great use, great use.
yeah.
Um, feel free, anybody who's still got some more questions. One of the things though, and this is kind of a question for, since Ilda has been sharing with us how she's been doing this, I wondered if people wanted to get in the chat and tell us if they're teaching themselves um, different programming languages, or if they're like what tools they're using to experiment with programming. What language, what languages are you programming in? What resources do you use? Just so we could kind of crowdsource some things. So feel free to get in there. Pivot tables. I love a pivot table, Faye. We
I
can
don't.
have a pivot table appreciation society. Um, okay, so next question is, where do you run your code? Do you use idle or another IDE or a notebook environment like Jupyter or Colab?
I'm using Visual Studio Code, and I
Okay.
know like Jupyter is dependent on like using the kernels. So yeah, I mean, like I said, my programming skills are pretty minimal.
But that's the first thing. You got to get that code set up somewhere. Ooh, it looks like we've got a lot of interesting stuff in the chat. We've got some people using R. We've got some people using Python, and attending a MOOC on Python for Excel was the best
Oh,
training. I took a Python class from Library Juice that I think was the first time I felt like it really spoke to me. And it kind of goes back to Ilda, to what you were saying about something that gets at the kind of data types we're dealing with, like looking for that
yeah.
cookbook.
Oh, good to know.
um, some MS Access. Excellent. Yeah, I love me an MS Access query and SQL query. This is great. Heidi, my colleague Heidi Webb and I are going to kind of capture all of this chat stuff, and we'll make sure that it goes out with slides and recordings and all that kind of stuff. Ooh, and here's a video. Thank you, Elizabeth. So that we can kind of share this, since you guys are clearly all involved in this space as well, which is so exciting. Ilda, I think. Okay, here's a good question that we had on the committee. How did you persevere through this work? Because we can all get so frustrated. How did you persevere through this?
I I feel like I just had this determination to like do this for my colleague to like show him that I can learn how to do this. I don't know now. Like thinking about it now, I don't even know. Like I should have given up a long time ago, but here I am. But I'm taking it really slow, and one thing that has helped me kind of build my confidence is breaking these issues up into even smaller chunks. So like there was one day I had a lot of TSV files, and I know my colleague's computer cannot read them very well. And I thought maybe I can use some Python for this. And I kind of was able to write something. I used the GitHub Copilot, but even with the Copilot, it didn't really work very well. There was just an issue with the way my data was getting read in, and I had to call in the help with of my colleague. And without his troubleshooting, I don't think I would have gotten very far. And yeah, so that just breaking it up into really smaller pieces helps.
Excellent. So we're gonna oh, and Yan says learning it with a cohort group helps too.
Yes.
And that definitely sounds like your experience. And I know Yan and I used to be colleagues until Yan left me for Duke. You know, I hold no ill will. But Yan started a great group at NC State that was for just people all over the libraries who are interested in Python. And it identified a whole bunch of people that I think like may not have known each other, like to be able that they could rely upon each other or ask questions of each other. And I think that was incredibly helpful. So that's, you know, and potentially that cohort group is people in NASIG, because we're seeing more and more people bringing great ideas like this one, like Ilda's, to the conference each year, where they're like, oh, I wrote this little script and it does this thing that's a problem for everybody.
Yeah.
Cool. I think we're probably close to wrap up. And so I want to make sure we give CEC some time to wrap things up. So I guess we'll hand it back to Chris.
Yes, and thank you very much for that. And I know I have colleagues who are looking forward to seeing the recording later on and learning from what you had to share. So thank you very much, Ilda. Just to close things up, we want to say thank you to everybody for attending today. And you can find a webinar evaluation survey at the URL that's listed there, and you should have a chance to give feedback after the webinar ends as well. And just a reminder that we do have a webinar archive where you can find webinars just like this one that are stored there. And we have a lot of great sessions that you can find there. We also have a YouTube channel with the URL listed. And one final reminder that we have another webinar coming up on February 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, getting started in publishing, editing, and peer review. And we hope to see some of you there along with many others. So thanks again for attending, and we hope that you have a good afternoon. Thanks, Ilda.
Thank you.